Have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life? Like you've done all the work, therapy, journaling, healing, but something still feels off inside? You wake up exhausted even after 8 hours of sleep. You scroll through social media and feel that familiar pang of envy, then immediately shame yourself for feeling it. You snap at someone you love, then spend hours wondering why you can't just be the person you think you should be. There's this voice inside you that whispers late at night. Who am I really? Underneath all this trying, all this performing, all this endless self-improvement, who am I? You've been taught that healing means becoming lighter, brighter, more positive. You've been told to focus on gratitude, to think good thoughts, to rise above your negative emotions. But what if the missing piece isn't more light, but the part of you you've always been afraid to meet? What if the very feelings you've been running from hold the key to who you really are? Today, we're going deep into the one thing no one taught you: how to stop running from your shadow and finally live as a whole human being. How to end the exhausting performance of perfection and step into the messy, beautiful truth of who you've always been. I used to believe healing meant fixing everything broken inside me. I chased every self-help trick, tried to think positive, and silenced every part of me that didn't fit the image of a healed person. I had vision boards and affirmations. I meditated every morning and journaled every night. I read book after book about manifesting and mindset and finding my purpose. On the outside, I looked like someone who had it all together. But inside, there was this constant tension, this feeling that I was always one step away from falling apart. I'd smile through conversations while my inner critic ran commentary on everything I said. I'd help others with their problems while my own feelings sat unprocessed in the background, growing stronger and more chaotic by the day. The more I ran from my negative emotions, the louder my shadow screamed. The more I repressed my anger, the more I found myself silently judging everyone around me. The more I tried to be grateful, the more bitter I became when life didn't match my positive thinking. I found myself judging others for their anger while swallowing my own. I preached self-love while quietly hating parts of myself I couldn't even name. I attracted relationships where I had to be the together one while secretly resenting that no one saw how much I was struggling. It wasn't until I sat down and asked my shadow why it was there that everything changed. It wasn't until I stopped trying to fix myself and started listening to the parts I'd been silencing that the real healing began. This is not about defeating your darkness. It's about learning to sit beside it, because that's where the real self begins. That's where the exhausting performance of perfection finally ends. That's where you discover that you were never broken. You were just incomplete. If you've ever felt like you're at war with yourself, this conversation is for you. If you're tired of spiritual bypassing and ready for spiritual integration, stay with me. Let's start by understanding what Jung really meant by the shadow. The shadow isn't evil. It's not the monster under your bed or the devil on your shoulder. It's something far more subtle and far more powerful than that. It's the part of you you've hidden away to be accepted, to be loved, to survive in a world that taught you that certain parts of yourself were unacceptable. Jung called it the thing a person has no wish to be. But here's what he understood that most people miss. The shadow isn't just your negative traits. It holds your anger, yes, but also your passion. Your jealousy, yes, but also your desire. Your shame, yes, but also your strength, your creativity, your raw, unfiltered life force. Think about the last time you felt genuinely angry. Not irritated or frustrated, but truly angry. Did you feel it fully, or did you immediately try to talk yourself out of it? Did you honor what it was telling you about your boundaries, your values, your needs? Or did you shame yourself for feeling it at all? Most of us learned very early that certain emotions weren't safe. Maybe anger meant losing love in your family. Maybe sadness was met with don't cry or be strong. Maybe your natural exuberance was told to quiet down, tone it down, be more appropriate. So you learned to cut off pieces of yourself. You learned to smile when you wanted to scream. You learned to say, I'm fine, when you were falling apart. You learned to be who others needed you to be. And slowly, you forgot who you actually were. Pause here. Did a part of you just whisper, "This is me"? When you ignore your shadow, something fascinating happens. You don't actually get rid of those feelings or traits. You project them. You see them in others. You judge others for what you deny in yourself. That person who's too emotional, that might be your unexpressed feelings screaming through them. That colleague who's too aggressive, that could be your buried boundaries trying to get your attention. That friend who's too selfish, that might be your unowned right to prioritize your own needs. Carl Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. What triggers you most intensely in other people? What makes your skin crawl or your blood boil? These reactions are not random. They're invitations to reclaim the parts of yourself you've disowned. Integration begins when you stop hiding what hurts and ask what it's trying to protect. Here are the 3 most common ways your shadow tries to get your attention. First, you overreact to traits in others you secretly repress. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah thought she was just a good person who valued kindness above all else. She prided herself on being the peacekeeper, the one who never made waves, the one everyone could count on to be agreeable and understanding. But every time she encountered someone who spoke their mind freely, someone who said no without apologizing, someone who expressed anger without shame, someone who prioritized their own needs, she felt a surge of disgust mixed with something else she couldn't name. Envy. She'd grown up in a home where anger was dangerous, where speaking up meant losing love, where being good meant being quiet. Her mother would go silent for days after any conflict. Her father would explode and then pretend nothing happened. So Sarah learned that her voice was dangerous, that her needs were selfish, that keeping peace was more important than keeping truth. She buried her voice so deep she forgot she had one. She swallowed her needs so consistently she stopped feeling them. But they didn't disappear. They went into her shadow. Her shadow held all that unexpressed power, all those unspoken truths, all that swallowed anger. And every time she saw someone else living authentically, speaking freely, setting boundaries clearly, her shadow reminded her of what she'd given up, what she'd sacrificed to feel safe. The people who triggered her weren't her enemies. They were her teachers, showing her what was possible when you stop abandoning yourself. Second, you feel numb despite doing everything right. This one is subtle but devastating. You meditate every morning. You journal every night. You eat organic food and exercise regularly. You've read all the books and taken all the courses. You practice gratitude and positive thinking. You've done therapy and coaching and maybe even some plant medicine or energy work. But underneath all the spiritual performance, there's this gray fog that never lifts. This persistent emptiness that no amount of self-improvement can fill. You feel like you're watching your life through glass, going through the motions, but never quite feeling fully alive. That's because you can't heal what you won't feel. You can't integrate what you keep rejecting. When you cut off your negative emotions, you also cut off your capacity for genuine joy, for deep love, for authentic presence. Marcus discovered this the hard way. He was a successful life coach who had built his entire identity around being positive and solution-focused. He helped others overcome their limiting beliefs while privately struggling with depression he couldn't name or claim. He'd learned early that his sadness made others uncomfortable. His sensitivity was called weakness. His need for emotional connection was called neediness. So he learned to be the strong one, the positive one, the one who always had answers. But his shadow held all that grief. Grief for his unmet needs. Grief for his unexpressed truth. Grief for the parts of himself he'd had to kill to be accepted. And until he could honor that grief, until he could let himself feel the full weight of what he'd lost, the numbness remained. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, it means you're ready. Don't turn away. Third, you live in constant anxiety when you're not in control. This one hits deep because it reveals how much energy you spend managing your shadow instead of integrating it. You've organized your entire life around avoiding your shadow's voice. You stay busy so you don't have to sit with uncomfortable feelings. You people please so you never have to face conflict. You chase achievement so you never have to face the fear that you're not enough. You control your environment, your relationships, your image. Because somewhere deep down you know there are parts of you that feel chaotic and unacceptable. But here's what Jung understood. What you resist persists. The more energy you put into controlling your shadow, the more it controls you. The more you try to be perfect, the more your imperfections run your life. The more you try to be spiritual, the more your humanity terrifies you. Jennifer was a yoga teacher who looked serene on the outside, but lived in constant terror on the inside. She'd built her life around being peaceful, grounded, and spiritually evolved. But her shadow held all her rage. Rage at being abandoned by her father. Rage at having to be the adult in her family from age 8. Rage at how much she'd had to sacrifice to feel worthy of love. Every time this rage tried to surface, she'd meditate away, breathe it away, affirmation it away, but it kept coming back stronger, leaking out in passive-aggressive comments. Chronic illness. Relationships that mysteriously fell apart just when they got serious. It wasn't until she stopped trying to be a good spiritual person and started being a real human person that her life began to change. It wasn't until she gave her rage permission to speak that she discovered it wasn't trying to destroy her. It was trying to save her. Here's the breakthrough that changes everything. Your shadow is not a flaw to be fixed. It's not a weakness to be overcome. It's not evidence that you're broken or unspiritual or not doing the work right. Your shadow is the unclaimed power of your soul. Let me tell you about David, because his story might sound familiar. 32 years old, successful marketing director, meditation practitioner, everyone's go-to guy for advice and support. David was the person his friends called when they needed a level head, when they needed someone to talk them through their problems, when they needed someone reliable and together. But David had a secret. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, he would lie in bed and fantasize about disappearing, about quitting his job without notice, telling his demanding boss exactly what he thought of him, and moving to a cabin in the woods where no one could ask him for anything ever again. These fantasies terrified him. He'd been raised to be helpful, responsible, always putting others first. His mother had been overwhelmed and leaned on him emotionally from a young age. His father was absent, so David learned that his worth came from how much he could help, how much he could give, how little he could need. His shadow held all the parts of him that wanted to say no, that wanted to prioritize his own needs, that wanted to set boundaries instead of building bridges. It held his anger at being responsible for everyone else's emotions. It held his exhaustion from carrying weights that were never his to carry. It held his deep, secret longing to be taken care of for once. For years, he pushed these feelings away. He told himself he was selfish for wanting time alone. He shamed himself for resenting the very people he was trying to help. He spiritualized his people-pleasing by calling it service, calling it love, calling it growth. But the shadow doesn't lie, and it doesn't go away just because you ignore it. One day, after another sleepless night of fantasizing about escape, David decided to try something different. Instead of pushing the feelings away, he sat with them. Instead of judging his fantasies, he got curious about them. He asked his shadow the question that changes everything. What are you trying to protect? The answer came not as words, but as a feeling, a knowing that rose up from somewhere deep and true. You're right to exist as you are, not as others need you to be. You've carried this long enough. Let yourself be still for once. This is the alchemy Jung spoke of. This is the moment when your greatest wound becomes your greatest gift. When your deepest pain becomes your most profound wisdom. The anger you've buried? It's not destructive rage. It's your boundaries trying to form. It's your no trying to surface. It's your self-respect demanding to be honored. The sadness you silence? It's not depression or weakness. It's your heart's way of processing loss, of grieving what was never received, of making space for what wants to be born. The fear you carry? It's not cowardice. It's your system trying to keep you safe, trying to prepare you, trying to make sure you never have to feel powerless again. The jealousy you shame? It's not pettiness. It's your desires trying to speak. your dreams trying to surface, your soul showing you what you're hungry for. Carl Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of a shadow without considerable moral effort." But here's what he also understood. This moral effort isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a whole person. It confronts who you think you are, and that's exactly why it sets you free. When David finally listened to his shadow, when he finally honored its message, everything began to shift. He didn't quit his job and run to the woods, but he did start saying no to requests that drained him. He did start asking for support instead of always being the supporter. He did start prioritizing his own needs without apologizing for having them. And something beautiful happened. His relationships became more honest because he was no longer pretending to be endlessly available. His work became more meaningful because he was no longer saying yes to everything out of fear. His energy returned because he was no longer hemorrhaging it through unset boundaries. True integration is when you can look at your darkest parts and say, "You belong here too." Not because they're good or bad, but because they're yours. Because they've been carrying wisdom you weren't ready to hear. Because they've been holding power you weren't ready to claim. And suddenly, the depression begins to lift. Not because you fixed yourself, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. The anxiety eases not because you got your life under control, but because you stopped trying to control the uncontrollable parts of being human. The relationships improve not because you became a better person, but because you became a real person. So how do you begin to integrate your shadow in real life? How do you move from understanding this intellectually to experiencing it in your bones? This isn't about dramatic confrontations or theatrical breakthroughs. It's about small moments of radical honesty with yourself. It's about developing a different relationship with the parts of you you've been taught to reject. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming who you really are beneath all the conditioning, all the shoulds, all the ways you've learned to be acceptable. Step 1. Notice your projections. Who do you criticize harshly? What traits in others make your skin crawl? What behaviors in your friends or family or co-workers trigger you so intensely that you can't let them go? These triggers are not random. They're not evidence that you're a judgmental person or that others are terrible. They're invitations to reclaim what you've cast away. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But this requires a level of honesty that most of us aren't comfortable with. Try this exercise. Think of someone who really gets under your skin. Someone whose behavior you find intolerable. Now ask yourself, what would it mean about me if I had this trait? What would I have to admit about myself? Maybe that person who's too emotional triggers you because you've spent your life suppressing your own feelings. Maybe that person who's too selfish irritates you because you've never learned how to prioritize your own needs. Maybe that person who's too angry bothers you because you've swallowed your rage for so long you've forgotten how to access your own power. The next time you feel triggered by someone, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in them? Not to judge yourself, but to reclaim what you've cast away. Not to become like them, but to integrate the disowned aspect they represent. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? Step 2. Sit with discomfort instead of fixing it. This is perhaps the hardest practice in our fix-it, optimize-it, positive thinking culture. When you feel anger, sadness, jealousy, fear, or any other negative emotion, your first instinct is probably to change it, fix it, or spiritual bypass it away. But these feelings have information for you. They have wisdom. They have gifts. And they can't share those gifts if you're constantly trying to make them go away. Try this. The next time you feel something uncomfortable, resist the urge to immediately journal it away, meditate it away, or affirmation it away. Instead, place your hand on your chest or belly, take a few deep breaths, and say, "I see you. What do you need me to know?" Then listen, not with your head, but with your body. What do you feel it? What color is it? What texture? What does it want? What is it trying to protect? This isn't about wallowing or getting stuck in negative emotions. It's about honoring them long enough to receive their message. It's about treating your feelings like messengers rather than enemies. When Elena finally tried this with her chronic anxiety, she discovered something surprising. The anxiety wasn't random or pathological. It was her system's way of trying to prepare her for disappointment. It was trying to protect her from the crushing pain she'd felt as a child when people she trusted let her down. Instead of fighting the anxiety or shaming herself for having it, she started thanking it. Thank you for trying to protect me. I see how hard you're working to keep me safe. And slowly, the anxiety began to relax because it finally felt heard. Step 3. Give your shadow a voice. This might feel strange at first, but try journaling as if your shadow were talking to you. Write with your non-dominant hand if that helps you access a different voice. Or imagine you're having a conversation with the part of you you've most rejected. Ask it, what are you trying to protect? What have you been trying to tell me? What gifts are you carrying that I haven't been willing to receive? What do you need from me? Then write whatever comes, without censoring or judging. Let your shadow speak its truth. Let it tell you about its frustrations, its longings, its wisdom. Let it tell you what it's been holding for you all these years. When James tried this exercise, his shadow had a lot to say. It told him about all the times he'd swallowed his truth to keep peace. It told him about his exhaustion from always being the good guy. It told him about his secret resentment toward people who seemed to effortlessly express their needs. But it also told him about his buried creativity, his unexpressed passion, his deep longing for authentic connection. It told him that all his people-pleasing had been a strategy to avoid the vulnerability of showing up as himself. Step 4. Find your shadow's gifts. Here's what most people miss about shadow work. Your shadow isn't just holding your pain and your problems. It's also holding your power and your potential. That anger you've been afraid of, it might be your passion waiting to be unleashed. That sadness you've been avoiding, it might be your capacity for deep love trying to surface. That selfishness you've been shaming, it might be your healthy self-care trying to emerge. Make a list of the traits you most judge in others. Then ask yourself, how might these traits serve? How might they be gifts when expressed in healthy ways? Aggression becomes assertiveness. Selfishness becomes self-care. Sensitivity becomes intuition. Rebelliousness becomes innovation. Neediness becomes the capacity for intimacy. The gentle return. This is not an instant fix. Shadow integration is not a weekend workshop or a 30-day challenge. It's a lifelong relationship with the parts you once disowned. It's a gentle, ongoing conversation with your wholeness. Some days your shadow will feel like an old friend finally coming home. Other days, it will feel like a stranger you're learning to trust. Some days, the integration will feel smooth and natural. Other days, it will feel messy and challenging. But slowly, gradually, something beautiful begins to happen. The war inside you quiets. The inner critic softens because it no longer has to guard against the parts you've rejected. The people-pleasing eases because you're no longer terrified of your own authentic responses. The anxiety loosens because you're no longer running from yourself. Lisa discovered this when she finally acknowledged her shadow's gift of healthy selfishness. For years, she prided herself on being the person everyone could count on. She was the friend who dropped everything to help, the employee who stayed late without being asked, the daughter who called every day to check on her parents. But her shadow held her right to say no, her right to rest, her right to prioritize her own dreams. It held her frustration at being taken for granted, her exhaustion from constant giving, her longing to be the one receiving care for once. When she started honoring these parts of herself, something beautiful happened. Her relationships became more honest because she was no longer giving from resentment. Her work became more meaningful because she was no longer saying yes to everything out of guilt. She stopped attracting people who needed fixing because she was no longer trying to fix herself. The real you begins to return. Not the perfect you, not the healed you, not the spiritual you. The real you, the whole you. The you that includes light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness. The you that was never broken, just incomplete. You don't need to be more positive. You need to be more whole. You don't need to get rid of your shadow. You need to sit beside it and say, "You are a part of me I no longer fear." You don't need to fix yourself. You need to find yourself. Underneath all the conditioning, all the shoulds, all the ways you've learned to be acceptable. Because that's where the alchemy begins. That's how pain becomes wisdom. That's how shame transforms into self-compassion. That's how wounds become gateways to your most authentic power. Your shadow isn't the enemy of your light. It's the guardian of your authentic power. It's been waiting in the darkness, holding all the parts of you that you thought you had to sacrifice to be loved. But love, real love, the kind that heals and sustains and transforms, doesn't require you to be less than who you are. It invites you to be more. It invites you to show up as the full spectrum of your humanity. When you integrate your shadow, you stop exhausting yourself trying to be perfect. You stop hemorrhaging energy through spiritual bypassing. You stop attracting relationships where you have to hide parts of yourself to be accepted. Instead, you become magnetic in a completely different way. You become attractive not because you're polished, but because you're real. Not because you have it all together, but because you're willing to be honestly human. People feel safe with you because you're safe with yourself. They trust you because you've stopped pretending. They're drawn to you because they can sense your wholeness, your integration, your willingness to be both strong and vulnerable, both light and shadow. Jung wrote about the sacred marriage, the union of opposites within the psyche. This isn't about finding your soulmate in the external world. It's about marrying the parts of yourself you've kept separate. It's about the meeting between who you think you should be and who you actually are. Between your light and your shadow. Between your strength and your vulnerability. Between your wisdom and your foolishness. This sacred marriage is the end of the internal war. It's the beginning of a life lived from wholeness rather than fragmentation. It's the difference between performing healing and embodying integration. Take a moment right now. Breathe and ask yourself, what will my life feel like if I stopped running from the parts of me I've been afraid to love? What would it feel like to stop apologizing for taking up space? What would it feel like to stop managing everyone else's emotions? What would it feel like to trust your own feelings, your own needs, your own truth? What would it feel like to stop performing and start being? Your shadow has been waiting for this conversation. It's been holding space for your return to yourself. It's been carrying the keys to your authentic power, your creative fire, your capacity for deep love and real intimacy. And when you finally sit down beside it, when you finally listen to what it's been trying to tell you, when you finally say you belong here too, something magical happens. The depression lifts not because you think more positive thoughts, but because you stop abandoning the parts of yourself that feel sad. The anxiety eases not because you control your environment, but because you stop trying to control your humanity. The relationships heal not because you become a better person, but because you become a real person. You remember that you were never broken. You were just fragmented. You were never lacking. You were just incomplete. You were never too much or not enough. You were just human, with all the beautiful complexity that entails. The journey of shadow integration is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's about ending the exhausting performance of being who you think you should be and finally meeting who you've always been. It's about coming home to yourself. If this resonated with you, if something inside you stirred recognition or hope or even fear, that's your shadow responding. That's the part of you that's been waiting to be seen, to be heard, to be welcomed home. The path of integration isn't always easy, but it's the only path that leads to genuine freedom. It's the only path that leads to authentic relationships. It's the only path that leads to a life lived from your truth rather than your conditioning. So if you're ready to stop performing healing and start embodying your truth, if you're ready to stop running from yourself and start returning to yourself, if you're ready to end the war and begin the sacred marriage, stay with me. This is just the beginning. The shadow work never ends, but neither does the gift of becoming real. Neither does the relief of finally being able to stop pretending. Neither does the joy of discovering that your darkness was never your enemy. It was your wholeness calling you home. Welcome home to yourself. all of yourself, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the wisdom and the foolishness. Welcome home to your integration. Welcome home to your truth. Welcome home.